Control. I'm a control freak. Let me take you now on a journey through time and space to 1995 when Volvo released an ad they called Stuntman.
I've never been afraid of heights. I guess I have a pretty healthy fear of death.
You conquer fear through knowledge. 1 centimeter this way or that way, and it's 400 miles down.
When I ask it to do something, it responds.
Control. I'm a control freak!
You know, some people say, I'll believe it when I see it. I prefer to say, you'll see it when you believe it.
It has stuck in my mind ever since, and the reason being, A, because it's so cool and edgy. I was 17 when it came out, and I can't say that I was their intended audience, but it certainly got me. But I crossed the place where it was shot, the Corinth Canal, every time I come to Greece, so I thought I had to get it into an episode. The ad was created by a guy called Walter Campbell and directed by a guy called Tony Kaye, and I reckon whether this was their style that they originated or not, it was certainly very contemporary, very forward-thinking, and it has been copied by every filmmaking indie idiot ever since. This is somewhere I cross literally every time that I come to Greece, so I thought there's no way that I can ignore putting it into one of the episodes. It is such a cool place. It was finished in 1893. The day it was opened, it was obsolete because ships had grown in the meantime and the bigger ones can't fit through it. It is still used by sailing vessels and smaller ships to this day, and at least then it was a miracle of modern engineering, and I think it's a very cool place, and I've explored it more than I ever have done to get this shot. I daren't go any further out in this catwalk because there are signs on this bridge saying don't go near it. Anyway, about this episode, I have no idea where it's going because I'm shooting this before I've kind of got the episode straight in my head. I just wanted to get it in to take the pressure off before I get back to Ireland. So essentially what I'm saying is, here's future me with something. It's the bus. Now, 2 viewers caught me napping. Mark Cross and Parknest both pointed out that I could have released the wiring from the headlamp loom without cutting it. And they're very right. So here it is. With this type of connection, you slip a small screwdriver in here and you just push down a tab that is there to lock it in place inside the plastic. It is as simple as that. It's a little bit fiddly because you're kind of pushing and pulling at the same time with something small, but that's how you do it. The only thing on the way back, in this case, I had to bend the tab back up because I'd flattened them slightly, but very easy. It goes back in and it is locked in there again solid. Onto the bus. Now that we have the VW Heritage panels, we can start looking at replacing some of this bodywork. And taking stock of things, the sills are pretty bad. I mean, they're not terrible all the way along, but I mean, to replace the front, you might as well replace the whole thing. The fore and aft have rotted through on both sills, offside and near side. The outriggers and jacking points aren't much better, so we have those to replace as well. In general though, the underside of the car is in pretty good nick. It doesn't look great, but it's caked in a layer of underseal and road dirt, or field dirt as the case may be here. This was a farm vehicle. The rust you see on the main sections of floor is very much surface rust. So I went to the front just to start cleaning some more and getting the last few little bits and pieces off that I could. There's some sort of brake crossover, I'm not even sure what this is, but that came out no problem. And it's amazing how little I can get done in a day when there's swimming and sunshine and stuff like that to be had. Now, we cut the loom last time and pulled it through the cab, but the main section is still running along the chassis rail of the car. And it's actually running through a pipe here which is fairly rotted away. It's clipped in with some plastic clips and some fold down metal tabs that are spot welded to the chassis. All very easy to remove, and I did pull it all the way through and it's out. While I was actually cleaning with the angle grinder, I caught one side of the handbrake cable, and wouldn't you know it, I twisted the hell out of it. I hope it's still redeemable. It's not frayed anywhere, so I'm sure it'll just pull straight again. Now the pipe the loom ran through, I pulled that out. That's absolutely toast. I might replace this with a plastic one instead that won't rot. It doesn't need to be steel. And of course the plastic won't rot through, it's just there to protect the loom. Up under the driver's wheel well, I unearthed some previous welding and some welding that we need to do. So right in the corner it has rotted through. This is going to be a little bit tricky to get into, but we'll manage it. And you can see to the right of this picture there is some welding. There has been some panel work replaced here. Quite roughly, but not badly. Back underneath the car, this is the ducting that carries heat from the engine to the cab. We took the pipe off in a previous episode that runs all the way up. That came out no problem, and I'm taking the gear selector shaft out here as well. I have to admit that, you know, it takes me sometimes a few days to get my head around what I have to do in terms of stripping off body panels. It was the same with the Range Rover. The sills are a little bit of a daunting thing, even though I know I'll get into it and it'll be fine and simple, but just a bit laborious. But it's the type of thing that puts me off sometimes, and instead of getting into them, I started working on mechanical stuff, and I thought that I could easily knock out in a few hours the stripping back of a radius stroke trailing arm assembly with the brakes. And I couldn't get enough purchase on this to break off some of the nuts. So I put the split pin back in the castellated nut and moved around to the back to try and get the damper off. The bolt sheared on that, but what are you going to do? And we can at least replace it. I could not get these bolts to budge, so I left that. And this is the story of the bus. It's just a case of slowly building up a few tools as I go, and we'll get there in the end. But for now, fractured as it is, this is the crippling slow progress of the bus. It has been a few years of days like this or weeks like this where I go there, I try my best to do some work, and there's either some kind of a speed bump or for some reason my motivation is really low. Thankfully I don't experience this with the other cars, but with this bus I just have been finding it very hard. I do though feel very close to a time when a lot of progress will be made. It does feel like there is a tipping point coming with this car. I hope. The loose idea I had was to take you on a driving tour of all of the cars I see along the road in Greece that I'd love to get my hands on. But as I went to the various places, most of them were gone. So I'm back in Ireland and I'm desperately trying to make some room for a new arrival. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I will only say this: what has 8 speeds, weighs 432 kilos, can be driven manually or in automatic mode, and is very classic. It's on its way. I expect it in not even a few hours time, so I got to keep going. If there was a loose theme for this episode, it is tooling. So here is a little bit of something that I've been meaning to bring you for quite a while. No peeking. Alright, sheet metal brake. We're going to make a big push today. We may not get it all done, but we're going for it. So the first thing I wanted to do was finish the welding along the bottom of the clamping jaw. And this didn't go badly at all. The only thing here is grinding this back. There's a big danger that I'm going to make it uneven and this thing won't sit flat. I'm wondering whether there will be anyone on the planet who would be willing to put this on a mill for me to make sure it was perfectly true, or if there's even any point in doing that. But anyway, that's for down the line. The gussets I am revisiting now, and I have a big bit in the drill press because I want to just put some holes through these. I don't really even know why. I just think it would look better, even though no one's ever going to see them. I drilled a pilot hole first and drilled through with the big bit. These discoloured pieces of swarf, the metal shavings, they, I presume, signify that things were getting too hot. Now I am using a cutting compound here, a dedicated drilling cutting compound, but still I think we've got a problem here, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Now these look much better in to me. We'll gloss over the fact quickly that you couldn't pass a closely fitting bar through all of them at once. So quickly moving on, we're going to tackle the end pieces, the bits that we'll use to clamp this down. So they're 120mm if you remember, and I'm marking them here to drill a nice big hole through the middle of them for the threaded bar that we'll use to tie them down. Now the bed on this drill press, the drill press itself, it's too small. I can't use a bit this size and drill a piece of this thickness. So I push the bed around out of the way, and I'm using just some pieces of metal to chock up the workpiece and get it in the right place for drilling. A little application of some cutting compound and away we go. This is another time-lapse moment. Being studious with the drill bit, this took a lot longer than it looks. So we're ready now to offer these up, and what I'm going to do is bevel all of the edges on everything, the clamping jaw and these clamping plates at the end, so that we've somewhere to weld into rather than just trying to weld across the surface. This allows the welding wire to get deeper in between the pieces of metal and hopefully make better penetration. And there's no time like the present. So here we go. I'm going to tack these on. I'm not going to weld them fully just yet. I'm going to tack them and make sure that we're square. So with one end done, just the one to do, and things look to be in good order. I'm not even sure how crucial it is that these are totally square. Anyway, they're only there to clamp the jaw down, and it's really about the jaw being square rather than the end plates. Now, time for the gussets. And I got the welds on the first one wrong, so I pulled it out and went again. What I'm doing here is I'm driving the weld directly into the clamping jaw body, and then I'm dragging it up onto the gusset to get penetration there. So again, these welds are overdone and quite ugly, but they're good and strong, and I can put more in once I get this all together. Now I'm not convinced this clamping jaw is right. What I'm doing here is offering it up, bringing the folding plate up to square the clamping jaw onto the bed, and then I'll clamp it down. But if you look here, you can see an oversight on my part. This is a little bowed in the center. I'm not sure whether it's actually bowed in the center or if it moves downwards towards the ends, but either way, it's not quite sitting perfectly flat. There's very little in it, but we'll see what difference that makes, and we may have to put some kind of a bracing on the top like we've spoken about before. So I have this section, I think it's inch bar, threaded bar, that I got from a hardware store for a different project. I'm putting this in, and I'm using the nuts to keep it square by tightening them up against the clamping jaw, and then I can mark around it. Now these marks I have to be very careful of because they're not exactly what you'd call precise. Depending on the angle I had to go in at with the marker, they get a little bit underneath the threaded bar, so they're kind of elliptical rather than perfectly circular, and I have to find the center of them almost by eye. This is not going to be a precision build, but we're giving it our best go. Now this little drill press, I bought this new some years ago, again for a different project. I think it cost 120 euros. It's again not a precise machine, but it was something that I could afford and it kept me going. It is not really big enough in any sense of the word for this job, but we're going to drill a pilot hole if we can find a bit that isn't blunt. And then we're going to use that pilot hole to drill the parent hole. Again, this drill bit is, I think, an inch, and this machine can't really go slow enough for this drill bit. I've been doing some reading up on this kind of thing. By the way, this looks like it's going backwards. It's not going backwards. This is a combination of the shutter speed of the camera and the frequency of the bit, or the RPM, creating an optical illusion. Anyway, this machine can't really go slow enough for this bit. The bigger the drill bit, the slower you want it to move. And every time you see it come out here, I'm putting some more cutting compound in to keep things cool and to aid the cut. But the fact is, this machine is not really the ideal machine for this job. But I have a plan, and all shall become clear later. Okay, so with that hole drilled, I can offer up the threaded bar again, and then offer up the clamping jaw just to see where we are. This was not easy. As you might imagine, this clamping jaw has become very heavy with everything that has been welded together. This seemed fine, so I got a little clamp out, I clamped it down as square as I could, and I have let on the threaded bar again. In comes our spring from our Astra belt tensioner. Just to mark a height, I really hope that I can use these springs in their entirety. I have a feeling they're going to be too long, but I'd like to keep the nice finished ends on them. So I cut the threaded bar, offered up the spring, and then on with the clamping jaw. And as I suspected, the spring rate is way too high and the spring itself is way too long. So I'm probably going to have to cut this down, but that's another exercise in learning, and we'll tackle that in a bit. This is starting to look very cool though, and it's going to be very nice to use, I think. Underneath you can see I've kept the threaded bar flush. I will weld it from the bottom, then I'll clean up the welds on the top side so that the spring will sit all the way down and it will look nice and neat. I'm also going to have to gusset underneath this because obviously the weakest point in this equation here now is the bed. But I ran out of time, and that is for another day. So we're moving on. Where are we moving on to, you ask? Well, I'm not sure. I have finally gotten a handle on this episode. We are going to forego an interview this time and keep it full of meaty workshop goodness. Before we do though, have a look at this. This is a BMW 325 Xi, which is something we didn't get in Ireland, a 4-wheel drive 3 Series. It belongs to Dave Nagy in Saskatchewan, and he calls it his little piece of shit. And he says it has consistent oil leak problems, which he's tackling. He's braving the cold to tackle, which is very cool. And there's a common theme running through this section because Matt Wilson in Jacksonville, Florida has also a German car, a Porsche 944, which is so patinaed, Ratlook guys would drool over this. You couldn't pay for this kind of wear. But Matt went investigating this undercarriage and found that there were bolts missing from the transaxle, the torque tube and the drive shafts, and when he went further he found more missing up at the engine and copious oil leaks. So he has pulled the lot off the car and is getting on with it. Guys, I hope you get the car sorted very, very soon. You are both very worthy, recipients of a Valley Pro kit, but I want to send it this time to a fella in Ireland, a guy called Ron Richardson. And I met Ron initially because what Ron does is works for the Road Safety Authority here. He fits child seats for people. They have open days and you can have Ron literally make sure that your child seat is properly fitted and adjusted, which is a noble thing. But what Ron had told me initially was that for years he had lusted after this Austin 8, and because of the usual things, money, time, familial responsibility, all that kind of stuff, he hadn't been able to get it. Well, he finally just went out and did it, bit the bullet and said to hell with it, which I think is something that should be rewarded. So I want to send it to Ron. He is so happy now with his car, and that just, it's proof that going out and just doing it sometimes is the best thing. I don't know what the etiquette is with polishing a 1946 car. I'm sure a bit of wax won't hurt it. Ron, I hope this thing is a bit of fun for you and the family, and well wear, mate. Okay, I did a mod on a piece of equipment in the workshop a while back that I just haven't had time to fit into an episode so far. Hence the idea that maybe we'll try mixing it up a bit and not have an interview. So have a look at this, hope you like it. This is the reel from my Welder. They tend to hold between 450 and 750 grams. Give us a twirl. And this is the reel from a bigger professional welder. These hold 5 kilos. They also come with less cursing, less wasting time, and most importantly, economy of scale. The small one where I buy it costs me almost 17 euros. The large one, about 60. Do the math. So after months of being driven stir crazy, replacing the small reels ad nauseum, I decided something had to change. So it was time to modify my welder. I pulled the top off it, and we should stop and make note here of the spring, the washer and the small screw that put pressure on the reel just to stop it from winding itself out with the force that's stored in it when the wire is wound onto it. So I pulled that off, and I pulled the sides off the machine to get access underneath the table so that I could take the spindle out. I thought I was going to raise the spindle, but there wasn't enough meat underneath it, so I decided to go a different route. I took a small reel, I pared it back so that it would act as a spacer that would fit down the bore of the big reel and make the interface between it and the spindle. It was just a case of shaving it down until it was just a snug fit inside. The next thing was the lid wouldn't close, obviously, with the big reel in it because it sticks out of the machine. You can see here I've let a hole into the back. I've had to cut some small sections out of the sides to give clearance and a large section out of the lid to give clearance. In the end, I had to take more out of the back plate than I would have liked to make it easy when replacing this large reel, but that is a small concession to make. I did this way back, and this large 5 kilo reel still hasn't run out, and you've seen how much welding I've done so far. The other thing which I was really surprised about, because I wasn't sure that the machine would be able to handle the weight of this, it seems to run better. The feed is more consistent with the weight of this big reel in it, which is just such a big bonus. So there you go, a really quick and simple mod, and it has made the world of difference. Watch as two grown men roundly fail to make even an impression on my new toy. Like I said, this thing weighs 432 kilos, but that would have been new from the foundry. This one has a few additions to it that mean it's as close to half a ton as makes no difference. It's what's known as a camelback pillar drill. It was made by a company called the Denbigh from Staffordshire in England, and they describe themselves as engineers, machine tool makers, mill furnishers and iron founders. And I gotta tell you, if this thing is anything to go by, they knew exactly what they were doing. I first saw one of these in my buddy Sean, the blacksmith's workshop, at least 10, maybe 12 years ago, and I've kind of had my eye out for one ever since. And when this one came up, I felt this may be the last chance I get to have one of these before, you know, everyone has got them squirreled away and they're worth big bucks. But we managed to get it off the truck. It was slightly hairy, but this is the Denbigh #1 drill press, and the knot that you see on this is the mark of the company, but I also believe it's a mark of the Staffordshire area. And I've heard a story, unsubstantiated, that a hangman was asked or told to hang 3 villains at the same time, and this knot is what he came up with. There are still people who will fight over these, and I was in a bit of a bidding war, but I got this for barely twice what my little bench mounted non-precision drill press cost me, and I reckon that's a win. The courier very diplomatically said there's no way we're getting it into your shed, so I let him off and I said I'll do it myself, and I set about stripping it down to get as much weight off it as possible. The seller bolted it through a pallet, by the way, and reinforced underneath with 2 pieces of plasma cut steel plate. It was a decent job, but it meant that the hand truck wouldn't go through it easily, so you might have noticed that we raised the pallet until it split slightly and we chocked it with some pieces of plywood just to get the hand truck through. Now this cage you see here hanging off the table would have been a safety cage over the motor, and the motor is why this machine was sold. It died and the seller decided he would just replace the machine rather than getting a new motor. He was actually very surprised. There was a couple of us in a bit of a bidding war over the machine. Anyway, the first bonus is there is a very big all steel vise strapped to the table on this thing. So that had to come off first to reduce weight, and so we could inspect the table. We didn't get away without having a few pock marks on the table, but it really is good. Some of these things look like Swiss cheese when you see them. The second win was there's a lamp. There's a work lamp strapped to the safety cage in the back. It's not a particularly period one, but hey, it'll do. Next thing I pulled off was the switch box. Every little helps. And then I went for the safety cage at the back. Now, The safety cage is one of the only ways, I think, unless you know different, that you can age one of these things. This one makes no difference to me because it's not an original cage. But a law came in the UK in the 1950s, I think 1955, that meant that anything like this, exposed belts, would have to be made safe in a work setting. So the Denbigh company would have produced these post 55 with safety cages built on. But this cage is not original, so I'm still in the dark. And if you've got any info about how to find tooling marks or references or anything to what age this thing might be, I'm all ears. This is a power feed. It's not hooked up at the moment, but the seller did send me some spare belt, so I will hook this up. It means that the drill can bore a hole by itself and it will knock itself off too. And this box at the back is the gearbox. It gives you your second set of ratios. And now I was moving this thing with a very large bar hooked into the pallet and just wiggling it along the ground. And it wasn't until I got very close to the shed that I realised it's not going to fit in the door. With the added worry that I wouldn't be able to actually physically move it without the bar, I knew I was going to have to pull the top shaft and pulleys out of this thing. And you see here, I'm trying to do it without knocking the gearbox out, because you have to loosen the gearbox to get the top shaft out too. But I managed it. Now we've got clearance for the door. And the moment of truth, would I be able to move it? And I was just able to walk it off the pallet, but this thing still weighs in. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I'm not the smallest either. And this took some very careful application of all of my strength. So that I didn't injure myself, but this thing actually happened. Well, it took me all afternoon to get this thing into the shed. It was just getting dark. And you might ask yourself, what do you need with a 6-foot industrial pillar drill? Well, what do you need with a nice watch or a Lotus Esprit? You know, I tell you something, this is part of my dream to build a garage, a dream garage full of beautiful, well-made quality vintage and classic tools that allow me to have the peace of mind that whatever I want to make or build, I can go and do it and know I can do at least a semi-decent job on it. We will source a motor for this thing, and we will do a lot of tidying up and probably even painting it a different colour. That's all to come. I have to pinch myself when I think that that drill press is standing out in the shed. I would probably have it standing at the foot of my bed like a kid who got a new toy and wants to wake up and see it if I could. It is an absolute behemoth though, so that's not going to happen. But you know, maybe I'll get a forklift next. I have to thank my patrons: Dr. Will, Carl Hedlind, Kayanu, Marius Myra, Matthew Capper, Pobosnai Laurend, Ron Richardson, Sam Baldwin, Spencer Cannon and Tim Hoveard, all new patrons: Ira Babb, Colin Young, Jason Noyles and Philip Vossem, all up their pledges. Gents, drill press. And you know what? I have criteria for spending any money. It has to be directly related to soup and it has to provide content too, and that thing does it in spades. We will be seeing more very soon. Speaking of more, episode 22 marks a year of soup. 22 episodes, a lot of things learned, a lot of work done on cars. Nothing finished yet, of course, but we'll get there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the episode, but I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you stay tuned. Until then, stay stuck in, and good luck.
They think my stunts are crazy.